I am going to welcome Jen Navard. I'm going to ask her to tell you a little bit about herself. I didn't want to take that thunder away, but I'm so happy to have you today. Thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. So Jen, take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Talking to you from New Orleans, Louisiana today. So we're going to be talking about benchmarking your firm and some tools for that and some recommendations we have for how to use that to improve how your firm is doing. A little bit about Psmj. I'm assuming most of you are familiar with Psmj, but just a little refresher. You know, we work to help firms in the AEC industry improve their performance, and we do that through 4 different avenues. There's a newsletter, there's surveys, which you're going to be hearing a good bit about today. We do seminars and conferences, and oh, please let us get back to in-person seminars soon because I miss them terribly. And then there's the consulting. A little bit about me. So I've got about 36 years of experience. About half of it was in non-AEC industries. I started out as an auditor with Arthur Andersen, so that dates me, obviously, if I've been in the business 36 years. So that was back when it was a Big 8 accounting firm. Then I worked in a variety of industries. So about half of my career was in non-AEC industries, and the other half landed here. So kind of sometimes I can bring a little bit of an objectiveness to what we do, but then I have a pretty deep experience in how we do things in this industry. Our firm, like I said, I'm in New Orleans. We are a 50-person firm. I am a principal, so that's kind of my full-time job. And then I work with Psmj sort of on a side gig, which is what most of the consultants for Psmj do. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about why we think you should benchmark your firm and why it's important, especially now. We're going to talk about what trends we've seen for firm financial performance in our industry and how to track your own firm, how to benchmark your firm, and we'll demo the tool that Psmj provides to those who participate in our benchmarking survey, and then we'll hopefully get to some questions and send you on your merry way. So as we get started, we're going to do a few polls, and here's the first one. So, one of the things I've found that's unique in this industry is we tend to like to know how everybody else is doing. It's not unique, but it's very more noticeable in this industry than other industries I've worked in. But so we're going to do a few polls, and one is to sort of see how's your firm end up. What did 2020? At the beginning of 2020, we were all really thrown for a loop with COVID. So how did our firms end up doing?
We'll let it go until we have a pretty good majority of the people. So a couple more seconds. Jen, can you see that? Do you want to just read them off? Or do
yeah, so looking at about 40%. So the majority had about a profit of between 11 and 20%. 30% of us had 0 to 10% profit. So 73% of us were profitable. And then another 85% were more than 20% profitable. Only 16% had losses last year. So I think particularly at the beginning of the year, we were all really nervous about how the year ended up. So it's nice to see that we managed to do fairly well. Let's see if I can take this slide. So the next poll, one more poll for this. What do you think 2021 is going to look like? Are you expecting it to be about the same? You're going to grow a lot, grow a little? Where do you think you're going to end up?
And again, we'll let that go for a while. A couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to share it, end it, share it.
So we're similar, right? So it looks like 2021 is shaping up to be a fairly good year for us, which is really nice to see. You know, most of us are expecting to either stay the same or get better, and a few, 20% of us, even more percent, 10% growth over last year. So it's good to hear. And we'll move on. It's good to know. So benchmarking. Why is it important? And especially now, why is it important? What does benchmarking do for you? So it provides the biggest thing it does, right? So as firm leaders, our goal is to try to make good decisions at the right time. And there's a lot of clutter right there. We have financial statements and financial programs that provide a significant amount of data, hopefully. And what do you do with it all? And what's important, what's not important, and how do you know what to focus on? So with benchmarking, we think it helps you get clarity and focus on the right things at the right time. It highlights the areas where you should be making your adjustments. You know, we can, and I suffer from this disease. I can get really caught up sometimes in spending a lot of time worrying about something that if I can get backed up a little bit, find it's just not nearly as significant. I think, that the coffee, how much we spend on coffee is really not going to affect the profitability in the long run. And even when it comes to technology or our office space, we're going to talk a little bit about that later. You can get really caught up sometimes in focusing on something that's really not driving your firm's performance. And so measuring our KPIs can help us focus on the right areas. And once you've focused on those areas, and once you've combined them with your strategic planning and your strategic objectives, KPIs provide a tool for measuring results to see if you're achieving what you set out to achieve. The tool we're going to be using today, and we're obviously hoping you'll participate in, is the Psmj Financial Performance Survey. So there are, I think, 3 surveys they're doing this year. One is the Financial Performance Survey. We already did the compensation survey and benchmarking, benefits survey. Those went out and were collected earlier in the year, and now we're working on the Financial Performance Survey. Highly recommend you participate. We're going to get into those in a little bit more detail. If you participate in the survey, you get a benchmarking tool of your own for free, and then you get a 50% savings on published reports. I don't know if you guys get as many invitations to complete surveys as I get, and the surveys I participate in are Psmj and the AIA surveys, and one other, the design intelligence surveys, because that's specific to design-focused architecture firms, which is what we are. So you're looking at surveys to participate in, pick the ones that are most relevant to your firm. I obviously think this one is, and I'm going to encourage you to do it. But yeah, you've only got so much bandwidth and so much time. But so pick the surveys that are going to do the most for you. The Psmj survey ends up being with about a 250-page, the full report, and it's pretty in-depth when you get it. So let's look at some performance, some financial trends that have been happening in our industry. The last survey that was put out in early summer of 2020 based on 2019 results, and our industry was doing fairly well. We were hitting our multipliers, our profits were up, our revenues were up, our backlogs were up, our staffs were growing, and we were keeping our overhead steady. So as an industry, we were doing pretty well. And we'd maintained that steady growth for a number of years. These 2 slides show revenue and staff growth. And we've been, post-recession, you see that dip in 2009. that we hit, that nasty recession dip. We came up pretty quickly, which was a fast growth out of the recession, and kept that positive growth and positive profitability. You see staff has grown similarly, although at a lower pace. And part of the result of that, or the consequence of that, is profits. Our profit as an industry, we hit some of consistently high profits, and the highest profits we've had since we never even hit it in the early aughts. So congrats to all of you. We've been doing well. Hopefully it's seminars like this and attention to these metrics that the Psmj promotes that's helped you all achieve these results. So congrats to you, and hopefully we can continue that. So what drives these profits? And one of the things we did a survey a few years back and asked firms which metrics they were most likely to track. And the most common metric firms tracked is utilization. And part of what we're going to be talking about today is the importance of utilization, but how there are other KPIs that you need to track. You cannot, and why it's not a good idea to just focus on utilization. There's other KPIs, overhead rate, days in AR. Those are all good and important, but what we're going to be talking about today is some other metrics that we encourage you to put some focus on. And so the three we're going to mostly focus on today is utilization rate, which you all are already tracking, right? That is your direct labor divided by your total labor. And your utilization rate is in dollars, not in hours. So when we're looking at KPIs, keep that in mind, because how you pay people is going to influence that utilization rate, the compensation levels. And so it's real important that you use labor dollars when you're calculating your utilization rate. The next is going to be direct labor multiplier, which is your net revenue divided by direct labor. And then there's a third multiplier, or a third KPI, the overhead rate, that's going to influence profitability. But because 60 to 70% of our costs in the AE industry is going to be related to labor and benefits, the focus is on the utilization rate and the direct labor multiplier. That's driving profits. So utilization rate, what does it tell you? It tells you how you're using your staff, if you've got the right mix of overhead versus chargeable time. What are you spending your time on? Do you have the right level of management to staff, and whether or not you're keeping that balanced? Over the last, since Psmj has been keeping this data back, 40 years almost, and utilization has trended down in that time, and that's primarily because of technology coming in, AutoCAD and BIM. As we add those technologies, there's more time in training, more time in system setup, getting projects organized and ready to go. So utilization has trended down. What I found interesting is just in the last 10 years that utilization's basically stabilized. We've stayed right at about 59 to 60%. As our revenue growth has kind of stayed stable, so is our utilization. But we want to make sure you're not focusing too much on utilization, because you can kind of get it can give you a false indication of what your performance really is. You can also sort of mislead yourself, or kind of, be an ostrich, put your head in the sand, and you can focus on utilization. You're like, well, look, we can make our utilization go up. We can charge, every hour gets charged to a job, no matter what you're doing. You can take your BD time and charge it to your project. So you can get utilization high, but is that really driving profits? If 60 to 70% of our fees are used or used by labor, if just charging times to a project doesn't mean you're making profits, unless you're, everything you do is time and expense, and all of your hourly rates are, generating the right level of profit. Just charging times to a project isn't going to drive your profits. In fact, if you're have incredibly high utilization, you can actually reduce your profits, because if you can't bill for that work, you're not going to hit your profit targets. So what do you use to ensure that you're actually driving profit? And that's the direct labor multiplier. You're charging enough fee for what you're working on, the time you're charging to the project. So your net revenue divided by direct labor. And it's a really great tool, because you can calculate your direct labor multiplier at the project level. And you can track that, and you can see how a project's doing over time. And it can help you identify when scope creep is coming in. What we've seen over the past 20 years is, over the first 20 years that we were doing these surveys, firms had a 3.0 target multiplier. When we're talking about that direct labor multiplier, when you're selling a project, you start out with what your target should be when you're budgeting your project. And we used 3.0 for 20 years. Finally, in the early 2000s, firms, hopefully again through seminars like this and consulting services, or firms just learning to manage better, finally said, well, maybe we can up our target a little bit. And what happened is that profits followed. So kudos to all of you guys, doing a great job. What was even better is our achieved multiplier went up. So if you look at this here, long about 2008 was when we really started increasing that target multiplier. Well, the profits started increasing at about that time. We took the dip. The achieved multiplier actually stayed pretty high even with the recession, and dipped a little bit. But what we found, sometimes when you set the bar high and you set the target, you're going to be more likely to achieve the target. So what's ended up happening is, over the last few years, our achieved multiplier is now going over our target multiplier as an industry. So there's that mindset. If you set the bar a little higher, you're more likely to work towards and achieve a higher level. And that's kind of proven out by this data here. For we had that 3.0 multiplier, and it was never changing. We were doing a better job of hitting it, but we still weren't getting there. And over the last 4 years, we're now instead of having a net revenue deficit, we're having a net revenue surplus, which is really good. So what happens when you take utilization and direct multiplier and you mush them together? Not mush them. You combine the two. You get something we call the net payroll multiplier, and essentially it's your net revenue divided by your total labor. And if you track that one factor, we're also call that a revenue factor. And when you track that factor, it's a pretty strong correlation with profitability. If you want to, if it's like, if your question is, oh my gosh, I have all this data to track, what are the most important thing to track? And that's this revenue factor. And if you're tracking that, you're going to have a great indicator of your profitability. And over the years, what we've seen is that revenue factor pretty much follows our profitability. So there's a really strong correlation between those two items. So what's happened to our payroll multiplier over the years, or our revenue factor? And again, right here is about when we started increasing our target multiplier, and we're doing it. It's been steadily increasing. So just to throw in a little extra kind of last piece, we talked about how the revenue factor is kind of the greatest driver of profit. But you do have one other component, and that is overhead. And there are some conversations going on in a lot of areas. I'm sure you're probably keeping track of them like I am. And I'm very curious to see what's going to happen to our overhead rate right now. We've over the last 20, 30 years, our overhead rates have been, they were increasing. That it was down here at about 150% back in the late 90s. It started going up particularly high during the recession, and that's firms either holding on to overhead staff or keeping their BD staff, or just being stuck in leases. When your revenues go down, you can trim staff, but you really can't trim overhead quite as quickly. But what has happened when we got to the more recent times, overhead stayed pretty stable. Once we add overhead into the calculation of profitability, you're going to have a really strong correlation between your revenue and your revenue factor, including overhead and profitability. So here's the three top KPIs: your direct labor multiplier, your labor utilization, and your overhead rate. And this is looking at just the last 10 years, and you can see our direct labor multiplier has really been the driver of our improved profitability, because our utilization, our chargeability has stayed pretty level. Our overhead rate took a little bump there with the recession, but it has been steadily since then. It's the direct labor multiplier, which means we're working on projects and we're charging the right fees to improve our profitability as a firm. And the end result is this profitability we've been noticing. So a couple more polling questions. So the hot topic that I'm seeing everywhere, and Psmj's been asking this question since we got into this COVID situation. So where are your staff currently working from?
So a couple more seconds.
So yeah,
Okay.
so we're generally about 50% of us are still mostly working from home. The other, we're kind of split either mostly in the office, 25%, and then 27 are kind of half and half. Our firm's about half and half. And with each week and with each set of vaccinations that our staff are getting, we're noticing more and more people are comfortable coming in the office, because for us, we've pretty much just let it, the office has been open and we've let people make the choices for themselves about whether they're comfortable coming in or not. And so in the last few weeks, particularly, we've noticed more and more staff coming back into the office. We kind of, so there's the results of the poll. Hopefully you guys can see that. It's been exciting. I happen to like being in the office. Probably has something to do with my generation and the nature of an accountant. I like to be here with my stuff. So we'll get to the next poll, which will be interesting to see. What are you going to be doing once we're kind of past this? Are we going to, have you figured out what your policy is going to be? Are you going to be in the office? Are you going to be remote? Are you going to be a hybrid mix? Or are you still out there trying to figure out what to do? And I think this has changed, and it's going to continue to change for a while.
We're almost a couple more seconds, then I'll end the poll. All right.
So yeah, so mostly in the office, about 47%. Only 3% are mostly remote. 38% are going to be a mix, and 12% is they haven't decided yet. I've been reading a whole bunch about this, because we're trying to come up with what's the right way to do and manage this for our studio. And what we're finding, and I'm starting to see a lot more articles about this. I didn't you didn't read, I wasn't seeing this 4 or 5 months ago. Most of the articles were like, yep, we're going to be working remotely forever. And now we're starting to realize we're missing that mentorship that you get. We're missing new staff coming in and just learning from our more experienced staff. We're missing those hallway conversations. And I think sometimes we just miss seeing each other. We happen to like each other. I think our industry, this is the objective opinion of an outsider. You have some of the nicest people I've ever worked with are in this industry. And you saw, I've worked in a bunch of different industries. People are nice and we like each other and we kind of miss each other. And I think coming back into the studio is for us kind of where we're going. But you also want to appreciate, you're probably reading as much as I am, the number of, the expectation for continued flexibility of that option of working from home. But that's going to come with some issues of its own, because who's in the office on what day and how you get that critical mass that you need for real mixed conversations. How are you going to manage that? I think there's going to be a whole lot of experimentation that's going to be happening over the next year, and so I'm very curious to see what's going to happen. So one of the polls we've been doing, and you've probably seen this if you attend any of the Psmj events, is, what are you going to do with your office? And this is another poll that I think has started to change. I think a lot of you had during COVID, you've got people who reduced their office space, but starting to see more people in this keep it the same. Because what you realize, and particularly if you're going to go to this hybrid mode or mostly back in the office, is people still want their workspace. You may use your space a little differently, and that's something we're thinking. We know we were already heading towards more collaborative spaces, but we're also saying we're going to need more collaborative spaces. We're going to need more spaces where people can have Zoom calls and be set up properly, so that, like me, I've got this lovely, that's my office behind us. Well, I would like that to look a little nicer. So some of the interesting deals, and this is the last polling question. When do you think we're going to get there? When are we going to be post-COVID? I can't wait. If you haven't figured that out yet, I'm really looking forward to it. But I'm curious to see what you guys think. How long till we get there?
A few more seconds. All right, ending the poll.
There you go. So in the fall, more than about 44%, 20% of us, 19% think it'll be this summer, and then 30% think it's going to be in the next year. I want it to be this summer, but I'm enough of a grown-up to realize what I want doesn't actually factor into this. I may want it to be this summer. I actually already want it to be there, but I agree. I think the fall. I'm kind of in the fall. My husband thinks it's going to be 2022, but he's more of a pessimist. I'm the optimist. So we'll see where we're going to go with that. So a couple of interesting trends with technology and office space. Prior to COVID, you can see there's a pretty significant trend up for IT expenses, and that is related to our friend Mr. BIM. I'm sure a lot of us use Revit and Autodesk, and there's been some chatter out there about Autodesk basically having a monopoly in this industry. I'm kind of interested in somebody disrupting that, but that's just another wish of mine. But it's getting expensive. It's pretty darn expensive. And then you throw in some visualization and the remote, ability, cloud software that you're renting your software, you're not buying your software anymore. Our IT expenses are going up. The other trend was our space expenses were going down. And I think that was, we had more of a trend to flexible office space, how we were using our spaces. Very few people have, their office is just a bunch of rooms with one person in each room. So trend was already there. I'm going to be real interested to see what happens in the next 2 years. And I'm throwing this next slide in here because I have to remind myself, just as much as I want to remind you, I can get really caught up on that IT expense and office space conversation. Our firm is talking about what our lease is up. And we're planning to move someplace else. And I can get myself really twisted into what our office space is going to cost us. And I have to remind myself, out of everything we spend for our firm, 16% of it is represented by these components, these overhead components. Most of what we spend our money on, it's people. So these two boxes, it's 43% of a part of our use of net architectural fee that represents only 16% of the fee. So, don't ignore it. Definitely pay attention to it, but also don't let it really tie you up in knots. Kind of interesting. Like I said, I think I need to sometimes just post this on my wall so that I don't get distracted too much. So real quick, we're going to go into benchmarking your firm and how to do that. So there's 5 steps. We're going to go through each one individually, but first you want to verify that your data matches apples to apples comparison. You want to pick which KPIs. Quick hint, there's 3 that you really should focus on. You want to figure out who you want to compare yourself and how you want to compare yourself. I mentioned I use 3 surveys that when I benchmark our firm, and that's because those are the surveys that give me information that most aligns with how we run our firm. You want to pick your target range for those KPIs that you're going to pay attention to, and then you're going to figure out how to get them where you want them to be if they're not where they are, if you're not where you want to be already. So the first part of this is the apple to apple metrics. And if I can make sure my technology is going to cooperate, there you go. Hopefully you're seeing this. Apple to apples comparison. When Psmj sends out the benchmarking survey, there's a segment that shows how all of the different KPIs are calculated. And when you're going to benchmark your firm, the first thing you need to do is to make sure that you're calculating the same KPI or your KPIs the same way your benchmarking data is calculated. The other piece of it is is the calendar year or the date, right? Whether your calendar year end or some other quarter year end, mid year end, however. Psmj's survey is going to be done as of December 31, 2020 for data for that year end. You need to maybe sometimes kind of look at your data with that in mind. Get back to this. So the next thing is pick your KPIs. Profitability. That's what that's one of our primary focuses, right? We also have others, but we're talking about KPIs. We're talking about profitability for the most part. And here's the 3, right? Your direct labor multiplier, your overhead, and your labor utilization. Those are the key KPIs to match. You get your revenue factor by multiplying your labor utilization by direct labor multiplier. There's probably some others you're going to want to keep track of. You want to look at your strategic objectives. Hopefully you've got a nice strategic plan out there that helps set a framework for what you want to measure and what's important to you when it comes to business metrics. Most firms, you're going to want to pay attention to your collection days because it doesn't do any good to bill for things if you never get the cash in. You need to keep an eye on work in process. I think this is a real important one because if you're not, things can get hung up in there, and any old work in process that's sitting out there is probably just something you need to write off, and that's a direct hit to your bottom line. So you want to make sure that doesn't get out of hand. Probably want to keep track of what your target multiplier is. When you're selling your work, what are you targeting, and what's happening with your backlog. I think sometimes we can get so focused on what we're doing with our projects. You don't want to lose sight of your backlog and if you have enough work out there for the future. Next step is which benchmarks you want to keep track of. What you want to benchmark yourself against. So when you get the benchmarking tool, you're going to look at how, which peer group you want to use. You can use staff size, you can look at practice area, the client type, what type of projects, geography. I think for our industry, staff size is one of the most important. When you're going to pick your peer group, I do want to make sure and you can see the information's here. You want to make sure there's enough firms in that peer group to have data that's relevant. If there's only 8 firms, well, it's probably not a critical mass, or maybe only 5 firms. So probably wouldn't put too much emphasis on those peer group results, but definitely the staff size. Once you have your peer group figured out, you want to see how your firm's doing within that peer group. So if you're looking at similar staff size, we benchmarked our firm, we were above average compared to other firms of our size. When we looked at firms in the same practice area, maybe you're average. When you look at firms with similar project types, maybe you're much above average. When you put all 3 together, how do you stack up? Well, you're above average, right? So you want to look at your measure yourself with different peer groups. I usually do the overall survey and the staff size and the practice areas. So architects. So then you want to take those results and actually use them, right? Because just measuring doesn't do a whole lot of good for you. You want to actually do something with your results. And so, where do you want to be? Do you want to be average? Do you want to be, hopefully you want to be above average? And be real careful when you're choosing where you want to be, that you're considering your strategic objectives. It may be okay for you to have a lower labor utilization for a year if you've decided, well, this year we're going to spend, X% of our time in doing some research because we think long-term it's going to benefit the firm. Those are all okay. It's just make those decisions consciously and don't just let them happen. So how do you drill down on your KPIs and use this information to drive improvements in your firm? Well, your first KPI, you set your goal, right? What do we want our profitability to be? We've seen this industry, we've become much more profitable, or somewhere in 18 to 20% profitability on average. Circle of Excellence firms, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but they're up at about 30, 35%. So what's your profitability goal? What's that? Next is, what are the major factors? You've got those 3 multipliers, 3 KPIs that you want to look at. Then you have to get to the actionable metrics, right? So if you're finding your direct labor multiplier isn't where you think it needs to be, what is driving that? Where can you make changes? What is actionable? If your utilization is not where it needs to be, do you have high turnover, or are you hiring a bunch of new people? And it takes a long time for a new person to become fully. Somebody was unmuted, kind of like a ghost in the machine.
Jen, you have to unmute.
I didn't mute me.
Thank you.
I don't know why. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that thing.
Okay. So using benchmarking and how to cut your costs. So we took a firm just as an example, and we're going to go through a benchmarking tool to kind of walk through this. But we've got a 73 person civil firm, and we want to benchmark them. So went to the benchmarking tool, and we took these, we took our overhead rate, utilization, office space, took out other, kind of looked at firms of similar size, similar practice, similar clientele, and we just made a nice little chart. And we looked at it. Well, what's driving this metric for us? Our overhead rate is higher than our peer firms, and we're finding, well, our office space and our liability insurance are kind of what's driving that. So it's kind of, how do you step that down to find what can you do? Well, for our office space, is our lease up? Can we sublease it? Can we renegotiate? For if it's liability insurance, if we're much higher than other people, perhaps we want to shop that. Maybe push your agent or find a new agent, maybe, to go out there and see if there's other firms writing insurance that you might not have access to. If you're really pushing to improve your KPIs, the full report you get, this is some data that comes out of it, and you can see the level of detail you can get. And it's what's nice about the full report is you're going to get a metric that's a higher level metric, perhaps overhead as a part of net revenue, but then you can actually see what's the difference if you compare that same metric looking at direct labor or gross revenue. So you can get down to a nice level of detail. We're going to go into the report here to just sort of show you how that's going to work. So if we look at the benchmarking tool you get, you go through, you select your peer group, and I'm going to show you real quick. This is what the survey looks like when you get it. If you do the survey a number of years, most of your accounting systems, you can generate an income statement that will spit the data out in the format you need. It's what I've done. I've generated a Psmj income statement. So when it's time to do the survey, it's pretty short exercise for us. So this is what the survey looks like. With each, when you get the survey, there's a nice little explanation about how what's included, because that's a big question. Not everybody categorizes their income statement the same way, so you want to pay attention to that. So you get the tool. There's instructions on how exactly to go about doing it. You copy your data in here. You select your peer group. That's what we talked about. And then you look at what your key benchmarks are. So here's your firm. It'll fill this out for you, and it gives you this nice little metric over here that says where you stand. Are you doing better or worse, much worse, about the same as the peer firm you've selected? In this case, I've got we've got a 24% profit, so we're up at about the 28th percentile. That's pretty good. If we picked a different peer group, so let's just say we picked 21 to 50 firms, you can see the median. We're actually closer to the median for firms of the same size. If we want to get up into the 75th percentile, it's about a 30% profit. So you kind of just go through here. It very nicely shows that. What is another perk here?
Excuse me, Jen.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we're seeing your worksheet, Excel.
Oh, let me.
We're still seeing the slides.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thanks for letting me
Okay.
know. Let me stop. I'm going to stop sharing and reshare my screen. Maybe we've got an issue with the share. See, when stuff goes, it just goes. Here's the. All right. Are y'all seeing the tool now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, good.
Sorry about that. I thought you were still describing what you were going to do.
Oh,
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So anyway, I'll go back real quick. Here's the data entry screen that I was talking about, but you couldn't see. Here's the key benchmarks, what that screen looks like. And then here's the graphics and trends. So the green is your firm. and the gray is the industry metrics, low, high, low, medium, and high. And if you've put in your firm trends for the last, once you've done this for 4 or 5 years, you can look to see, we're talking about results, right? Are you actually, you've set a target, are you hitting it and are you proving it? So it's got those 16 key metrics that are in this survey. I'm going to go doing this a little differently just in case the share wasn't working. Hopefully it'll work again. So that's the benchmarking tool you get. I'm not going to, there's a more robust tool, and I think you spend $100 and you can get a more robust tool that can actually walk you through how to pick a metric and like drill down and actually come up with a plan for implementing the metric. I think that's about an extra $100. If we have some time, I'll show that in a minute. So we'll move on. Circle of Excellence. Want to just take a real quick few minutes. I'm trying to save some time at the end in case there's some questions, because I went through a whole bunch of data pretty quickly. Circle of Excellence is the top 20% of firms completing the survey, and what are their metrics, right? So when you're trying to figure out where you want your firm to be, do you want, there's an option to compare yourself to the Circle of Excellence firms. And generally, they're at about 100% improvement over the median firms. Profitability multipliers, they're the best of the best. So we even have firms that receive a platinum award because they've consistently been in this Circle of Excellence. So you might want to consider benchmarking yourself against those top firms. So there's 2 ways to get this the benchmarking tool. One is to buy it. It's $500 if you want to just buy the tool, or you can participate in the survey and get it free. So that's an easy one for me. At the end of, I think Kathy's going to be sending out afterwards that you'll get a link to the survey to participate. Here's some of the perks. One quick thing I want to point out is your data remains confidential. You get a unique firm number. Your firm is anonymized, so you do not, no one knows what you submitted other than the person who has that little chart, and that's only one person at Psmj. Your data will not be sold. It will not be shared with anyone. The only thing your data is used for is to compile benchmarking results. The only person, so Jill Stooley is the managing editor of the surveys. She is the only person who has that master list, and it is not used for anything. So just to kind of, give you some comfort that your data doesn't get used or sold. You're not going to get random sales calls from people trying to sell you something because you fill out this survey, which often happens. Other surveys I've done. The cutoff date is April 23rd, so make sure you get your survey in by that date. With today's webinar, you're going to get a link to that survey. You're going to get the other stuff Kathy talked about. We've got about 10 minutes left. Kathy, any questions? Does anybody have any questions? I think you can put them in the chat box, or Kathy can unmute
Yeah,
you.
just put them in the chat. But there was a couple of people that have indicated they have a question. One is about revenue factor. Excuse me. They were wondering, his name is Ralph, why Psmj emphasizes revenue factor.
So
he was thinking that my point is that profitability is 100% correlated to profit.
Yeah. So but you're right. Obviously, profitability tells you whether you're profitable. What I've found in communicating or in trying to work with our team, profit is the end result. What's driving profit? Because that's where you want to focus. Where can you make changes to drive profit? And if you're watching your revenue factor, you can see the components of that revenue factor or where you make the changes to actually improve your profit. So, if for us, our firm, the thing we track most closely is the direct labor multiplier. And the reason we track that is because we can track it at the project level, and we can track it at the firm level, and we can see how the two are affecting one another. And what I do with that direct labor multiplier, not all projects are created equal. It's kind of our philosophy. And what matters is when I'm looking at profits for direct labor multipliers, the larger the project, the greater the impact it has on firm direct labor multiplier, which then has the greatest driver for profit. And so it helps, I use that as the tool to where do we focus our attention when we talk about project management. And, so that's, you're right, profit drives profit, but the revenue factor, which is primarily those two components, that's where you can make your changes to drive your profit.
Can you show us the revenue factor formula once again?
Yeah, let's see. I think it's one more. There it is. So what I do, because I calculate utilization and I calculate direct labor multiplier, you multiply those two numbers together, you get revenue factor. If you just want to look at revenue factor, you can take your net revenue and divide it by total labor. It's going to get to the same calculation.
Matthew says profitability is an outcome. Revenue factor is easily understood factor that combines two well-known KPIs. So you can hide utilization, you can hide NFM, but you can't hide from revenue factor because it combines both ends of the seesaw. Thank you, Matthew.
Yep, you said it better than me.
No, you both said it very well. Anybody else? I mean, you can ask in the chat, but someone can open their mic or their video and ask a question. Anybody? We have a few people on the call. Anybody before we wrap up? Quiet group today.
All right.
Well, let me just give me my spiel and then we can spiel and then we can go to Jen and she can talk a little bit more and wrap up. But just remember, you will get an email from me. It will be from csaseri@psmj.com. So you'll have my email. You're going to have the slides that Jen sent me prior to, so I have them. You're going to get a recording. I'll send you the link to participate. We'd love you to participate. I know some of you, what happens is Jill gives me a list of people to call, and I don't know, if you've, if you had a survey in the past or what. I just get this blind list that she does for me. So if you do hear from me, I'm only calling for participation. So we just love if we have more people. It gets better, obviously. And then an attendance certificate. So just look out for that. And of course, you'll have my email if you have any questions. And I'll share Jen's email as well. That way you can reach out to her too. But Jen, anything that you'd like to emphasize moving into 2021, or we're already in here?
No, I'm really curious to see, are we going to have the Roaring 20s? So that's my good question right now. Like I said, I'm in New Orleans and I am dying to go listen to some live music. So hopefully we're all going to be there soon. I think this coming few years, we're going to have a lot of changes. That's what happens when a disruptive event happens. But if you're talking about managing your firm and how do you have a resilient firm, if you're keeping track of your key performance indicators, it's going to be one of the steps towards getting you there. But that's a whole nother presentation.
Yeah. We did have someone ask about PPP funds and the calculations. The survey does address that, so that everybody does it in the same way.
Yeah.
So. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, and feel free to reach out to me. And thank you so much for spending an hour with us. We do appreciate it. Jen?
Thanks a lot, guys. I'll talk to y'all later.
Bye-bye all.
Bye.